Madam Speaker, today I am deeply honored to table my private member's bill, an act to amend the Criminal Code, promotion of hatred against Indigenous peoples, to end residential school denialism. I would like to thank the honourable member from Vancouver East for seconding my bill. A bill I dedicate to all residential school survivors and our family. Survivors have carried truths that this country needed to hear. Truths of violence, loss, and resilience. They shared their stories not to reopen wounds, but to help this country heal. As the Truth and Reconciliation Commission reminded us, without truth, there can be no reconciliation. Yet today, denialism is spreading, twisting facts, denying genocide, and reigniting harm. It is not only hurtful, it is dangerous. It endangers survivors, our families, and our nations who continue the work of truth-telling. Mr. Speaker, we owe survivors more than words. We owe them action, and this bill is about protecting their safety, honoring their truths, and ensuring that the hard-won truth of what happened in residential schools is never erased or denied again. I call on all members of Parliament to stand with survivors, to protect the truth, uphold dignity, and walk the path of real reconciliation together. Thank you, Madam Speaker.
So joining me now is a good friend of the show, Michelle Stirling. You may know her in another capacity, but today she's appearing as an independent researcher. And I wanted to have Michelle on the show because she's done such great work on the residential school discoveries or lack thereof, and the people involved in pushing the narrative that even questioning what has or hasn't been discovered at residential schools should be criminalized. And I'm talking specifically, at least this week, about NDP MP Leah Gazan. Michelle, thanks so much for coming on the show. Tell us what Leah Gazan wants to do, I guess, to people like me and you. And then we'll get into a little bit more about who exactly Leah Gazan is.
Leah Gazan in the past Parliament submitted a bill C-413, which was intended to criminalize residential school denialism in the same way that in terms of the Jewish Holocaust in Europe during World War II, it is forbidden in Canada to deny that the Holocaust happened. So she wants to have that similar thing applied to people like me who bring forward good stories. She calls it downplaying the damage of Indian residential schools. And of course, we have in a circle of colleagues an intrepid researcher named Nina Green. And Nina started exploring the history of Leah Gazan's own family. And guess what? In her own family, she has a very successful Indian residential school thriver, a graduate of the school, her great-grandfather, John LeCain. So he was one of the Lakota people who came over the border after Custer's last stand. And of course, the cavalry was pretty much in hot pursuit. Canada gave them asylum in Canada. And his mother took up with a Northwest Mounted Police officer who sustained the family because they were in very uncertain times. You know, they didn't have status in Canada. The buffalo were certainly dying out. There wasn't much hunting. So how would you survive? So anyway, his mother, whose name I'm just going to pronounce properly here if I can find it, his mother, Teshunke Nupawin, also known as Emma Loves War, she had sort of a common law relationship with LeCain, who was Archibald LeCain, a Northwest Mounted Police officer. And they separated because he was moving to Eastern Canada, but she stayed here. But the family took on the name LeCain. So John LeCain ended up somehow, because he was considered by the government as non-status and a half-breed, meaning that his father was white, he somehow was admitted to Regina Industrial School. And there are instances where Métis people were, or non-status people were admitted. It's not very common, but, sometimes the local priest would take pity on someone who was very destitute, or maybe a promising person, where they saw they could benefit. Anyway, he graduated successfully. He learned carpentry, and he learned to read and write. He became actually a historian of his people, of the Wild West, if you like, internationally recognized. And he was a devout Catholic. He helped build the local church. And so why is she hiding this story from us? He was a success story. He homesteaded. He was a settler. So he became an independent Indigenous person, having started from probably the worst position possible.
And yet, telling that story, what you're doing right now is something that Leah Gazan would seek to criminalize.
Right. And by contrast, why wouldn't I criminalize her? Because she is downplaying the benefits of Indian residential schools by concealing her family's history. Also, in the House of Commons, she told a very sad story about her mother, who was basically in a compromised situation because her grandmother had become, her life has kind of gone off the rails, as Nina likes to put it. She had taken up with a Chinese man, we don't know his name at this point, and had 2 children, which were Marjorie, Leah's mom, and Bill, her uncle. And the mother left them in a hotel room and abandoned them. So they were put into the foster child family services, the child welfare services. The thing is that this has nothing to do with Indian residential schools.
Right.
But Leah Gazan presents the story as if it does. So her mother, Marjorie, grew up to be a social worker and married Albert Gazan, who was a survivor of the actual Holocaust in World War II. Canada welcomed him and other members of the family to Canada and gave them refuge too. And now all Leah Gazan can do is accuse us of genocide. And, I really have a bone to pick with her regarding her motion in the House of Commons, where she got all the House of Commons to support it, to describe Indian residential schools as a genocide. Well, genocide isn't decided by a vote in the House of Commons. It's not decided by a travel-weary pope saying, okay, to badgering journalists, okay, it's a genocide. It's not okay. Like Sean Carlton is one of the people who claims to be an expert on residential school denialism. He would speak out vehemently against me. He claims that, they don't owe you their children's bodies, that none of us who demand evidence, that we're being heartless, we're being ghouls. That's how Mark Miller put it. Well, I'm sorry, if you're going to accuse me and my country, 10 million Roman Catholics, 19 million Christians, including the Catholics in Canada, half the population of Canada. If you're going to accuse these people of genocide, then we want evidence, we want proper due process of law, and we want proof beyond a reasonable doubt. We want to follow the rule of law. The presumption of innocence is enshrined in the Charter. So you can't run around calling Canadians guilty of genocide when the presumption of innocence is the charter right of all Canadians, and we have no proof that there was a genocide.